The way that TF2 is designed is that every class has a wide variety of tools at their disposal. The problem with doing this is that not all these tools are going to be created equally. Some of them add another layer of depth to the class that can use them, while others only exist to take up inventory space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that every weapon is equal in the eyes of God and Gaben by fixing the worst ones, whether that's through minor tweaks or complete reworks if it needs it. If you haven't seen the previous videos I've done with this, I'd encourage you to go watch them now, since I explain a little bit more of the rules in those. But anyway, as the title might suggest, we're going to be looking at the soldier weapons today. Like Scout, a good majority of soldiers' primaries are viable in at least one way or another. But there is one exception, and the exception is a little bit harder to defend. The Liberty Launcher sacrifices damage per shot for more shots per clip and slightly easier to aim rockets. The problem with this is that a clip of 5 Liberty Launcher rockets still does less total damage than a clip of 4 stock rockets, which is really bad considering that it takes longer for the Liberty Launcher to fire all of its clip. The only niche that this weapon does have that I've found is that it combos really well with the crits. Having only 203 damage per shot instead of 270 seems really bad on paper, but the reality is you're still going to be using about the same amount of rockets to kill 90% of threats. The extra rockets per clip helps you spread out the crit damage more effectively, and the faster rocket speed makes your crits easier to land. The issue with the Liberty Launcher presents itself in the 95% of the match where you're not going to be crit boosted, which never really makes me want to choose it over stock, even if there's a solid crits medic on our team. My solution to this weapon is to not only lean into the niche of spreading out damage a little bit more, but also to kind of close the power gap between it and stock when you don't have any damage boosts. So here's what I'm thinking we do. Basically, we tone down the damage penalty very slightly and add a firing speed bonus in exchange for stripping the weapon of the weird reduced self-damage stat. These stats make the damage of the Liberty Launcher a lot more comparable to stock, since with the new stats both stock and Liberty Launcher do the same amount of damage per clip and take about the same amount of time to fire all their rockets. Now before you go and call this a direct upgrade from stock, remember that the damage output is only the same when you're firing all of the rockets in your clip, not just partial, not to mention it also takes longer for the Liberty Launcher to fully reload. Since it's usually going to take more rockets on average to kill somebody with the Liberty Launcher, the stock still has a notable edge in the time it takes to get kills unboosted. With crits though, the Liberty Launcher takes that edge back by allowing you to have more control over how your 8 seconds of crits charge is being distributed. The reason I ended up taking off the damage to self stat is because I didn't feel like it meshed well with the general design of the weapon that I'm going for, and I don't want to have a weapon overtuned just for the sake of having it. Okay, now we're on to secondaries, which surprisingly are overall pretty good. They're not all good though, and when people think of bad soldier weapons, they're probably all thinking of the same one together, but there is more than one underused soldier secondary, so I want to address the less obvious ones first. So first of all, the reserve shooter changes that I suggested in the pyro video still stand. I'll at least show them on the screen here, but if you want to watch my reasoning for why I did this, go watch the pyro video. And I'm also planning on doing the panic attack and the engineer video whenever that comes out, so you'll see what I have in mind for that, and of course that will also apply to soldier. Anyway, let's start with the buff banner. The banner effect of the buff banner is arguably perfectly fine. What's always bothered me about this weapon though is that it lacks a passive buffs like the other two banners have. It's kind of hard to add something damage related without making it blatantly overpowered, but I still want to keep it thematically consistent with what the banner charge does, so here's what I'm thinking. The extra ammo would relieve the occasional problem of, get this, a soldier running out of ammo. There is really not much more to it than that. The reason why I chose the 40% stat, not like 50% or something, is because 40% gives soldier 8 more rockets, or exactly 2 clips, while 50% gives 10, which is 2.5, which would kind of be weird. And I also felt that 60% or 32 total ammo would be a little bit too much. Again, this isn't a bad weapon as it is, I just find it weird that this is the only banner that doesn't have a passive, and figured I might as well fix it while I'm at it. Quick add-on, because I had this problem in the pyro video and I want to avoid having it here. Some people might recognize this stat change from the high GPS balance mod, which is a popular rebalancing mod that you might have played on before, because they made this exact same change to the buff banner. That is completely coincidental. All the stats that I've come up with are completely on my own. It just so happens that a few of them are similar, or in this case exactly the same as what high GPS came up with. Hopefully that's because they're good changes, I don't know. I think I got a comment or two about this with the sharpened volcano fragment on the pyro video, because the high GPS balance does something kind of similar, and that actually kind of sucks because I was really proud of that one, but hey. Anyway, yeah, I don't look at the balance mods when I'm thinking about changes. Sometimes it just kind of happens because it's either obvious or we just have the same ideas, I don't know. Next up we have the base jumper, which is one that I was debating about leaving off the list entirely since the concept of the weapon is kind of annoying to deal with, but you know what, I ain't no coward, so I'm gonna do it. For those of you unaware, the nerf that they added a couple years ago took away the ability to redeploy the parachute in midair, which kind of defeated the purpose of the weapon in the first place. My suggestion is to add it back, but I understand that they nerfed it for a reason, so they also might want to add some sort of cooldown before you can redeploy, maybe like 1 second, just so you can't spam it in the air repeatedly. I know it's not the most exciting or original change, but I did feel that this weapon needed to be addressed because people would get angry if it didn't, and also it's just not a very good weapon as it is, in my opinion. Okay, now we're onto the one that everybody was waiting for. The Righteous Bison is a weapon that exists, and I think that even calling it a weapon might be giving it too much credit. I am really not sure what they expect this weapon to be used for currently, since it's basically just a worse shotgun in every practical way, but luckily for us, the concept of it is interesting enough to work with. So here are my new stats, and get ready to hear me out because there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. So what I'm going for with the Righteous Bison's redesign is I want to make its new role fairly similar to what the shortstop currently has for Scout. It'll do less damage than the shotgun at close range, but more damage than the shotgun at medium range. Of course, it still uses a projectile, which can get a little bit hard to aim, so I opted to add the 200% faster projectile speed stat to make it a lot easier to hit at longer ranges. The 250% damage bonus means that the projectile is doing 70 damage per hit, which would increase to 84 point blank with ramp up and decrease to about 49 at max range with fall off. Now get ready for some math, because there are also quite a few things that would need to be changed under the hood to make this weapon really work as it's intended. To help the Bison fit the role of a mid-range weapon, I'm going to be manually adjusting the maximum fall-off distance to 70% of the normal value instead of the default 53. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say damage ramp up or fall off, I'll put a wiki link in the description so you can read more about that there, but all you really have to understand with this change is that it means it's doing more damage at longer ranges. On top of these changes, we'd make the projectile only hit targets one time, so it wouldn't pierce multiple times, and the projectile damage it would have for every enemy it penetrates to make it a little bit less spammable. This is another really good case of me needing to see gameplay testing to see how powerful this weapon would turn out to be, so even if it sounds blatantly over or underpowered from the description I gave, I would encourage you to reserve the judgment for now. If it turns out that this is too spammable at long range, I wouldn't even be opposed to taking off the piercing stat and just leaving it to basically be a single damage projectile. Alrighty, now let's go on to the melees. Soldier is one of the very few classes who has a majority of his melees actually be fairly good. I know people stick to the escape plan most of the time, but most of the other melees do serve a distinct purpose. That being said, there are two exceptions I want to look at, and my suggestions for them are a little bit on the nose, so hang in there. So I know I use the term weird a lot, but the Pain Train is genuinely one of the most interesting weapon case studies in the entire game. In payload and control points, this is a fairly solid niche option that allows you to do the objective faster in exchange for the utility that other melees might offer. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that within those two game modes, this is a pretty good weapon. But outside of those two game modes, the Pain Train is the only weapon in the game that's a direct downgrade from stock, and that's the main problem of what people have with this weapon, is that it literally only functions in like 20% of the total game. So here are the stats that I made that might expand on that niche a little bit. The goal of this weapon is basically to be an objective stick, so why not make it work with all the objectives? So for reference, the increased objective pickup range stat affects things like player destruction drops, robot destruction cores, the capture the flag briefcase, really anything that has to do with the objective that you can pick up. Other than that, I think the new stats are pretty self-explanatory on how they help you do the various types of objectives. The only game mode that's left out of the new Pain Train design is Arena, but it's not really something you can queue for, and if you still disagree, I challenge you to find an Arena server in under 20 minutes. And finally, there's the Equalizer, which has the same condition, but literally none of the benefits as the escape plan. Now, I was just going to suggest a small damage boost and call it a day, but I thought of something a little bit more interesting that I want to get your feedback on, so take a look. Since the escape plan adds survivability in the form of speed, I figured what if the Equalizer added survivability in the form of damage resistance? So basically how this would work is when Soldier's at full health, he'd effectively end up taking mini crits when he holds the weapon. But as his health gets lower, the damage resistance begins to increase up to 50% when he has 1 HP. You can either use this to get out while you can, or to approach somebody and fight them with your increased damage dealt and decreased damage taken. So essentially, while the escape plan is a great escape tool with decent damage potential, the Equalizer would be the opposite of the decent escape tool with amazing damage potential. This could honestly either be super broken or basically useless depending on how you plugged in the numbers, so I have no doubt that this would take a lot of fine-tuning to get just right, but I think this would be a very unique take on the weapon that would truly allow it to live up to being the escape plan's counterpart. So that's going to do it with the weapons I am going to look at, but in addition to talking about the weapons that I do think need changed, I want to mention why I didn't put a couple of other potentially obvious choices on the list. So the Cow Mangler. The Cow Mangler is kind of in a weird spot, because it's perfectly fine, but it's still kind of underused. I think trading off full crits and damage to buildings for an instant kill charge shot is a perfectly workable stat, and I honestly don't even know what I could change that would keep the weapon still balanced. If I had to suggest any stats, it would be to decrease the overall damage while making the projectile unreflectable, but I'm not even sure how that would play out, so I don't even want to suggest that officially. But I know it's not a perfect weapon, but I still think it's fine where it's at. It's close enough to the stock rocket launcher in most regards that I don't think there's a whole lot that really needs tuning. The Airstrike is another one that sometimes gets thrown in the same boat as the Liberty launcher since it does less damage per shot. Now, I actually had stat tweaks written down for this one until I tried it out for a couple rounds and realized, you know what? Even though this might not be people's first choice of playstyle, this is really fun and also could be super effective if you use it correctly. This might be a controversial choice, but I don't think the airstrike needs any changes. The man treads are also a little bit of a weird one because while they aren't really bad on their own, the competition for Soldier's secondary slot's pretty tight. The reason I'm not covering them, though, is because I think they have a definitive place within the pure rocket jumper loadouts, and while they're not really as good as they could be, I would honestly argue that the niche makes them fine where they're at. The only two ideas that I had were a very slight damage reduction from rocket jump stat, but I felt that one would make him a little bit too close from the gunboats, or a movement speed increase like high GPS does, but I feel like increasing Soldier's ground speed is kind of redundant since he's going to be rocket jumping for mobility most of the time anyway, so I'm just going to leave them where they are. If you have any suggestions for the man treads, I'd love to hear what they are, but in this video at least, I'm not going to be covering them. Stock Shovel is another one that I'm not going to touch for the same reason I mentioned in the Pyro video. I really don't want to start the trend of messing with stock weapons, since the purpose of stock is almost to be a basic yet consistent choice that acts as a template for everything else in its class. It just so happens that the basic consistent choice is not a popular choice for some classes because of the utility, but I would at least rather it be consistent with the rest of the stock weapons and have it available if you want to use it. So again, I don't think stock needs changing. And finally, some people might have wanted me to put the half-zat to Ichi on the list since it doesn't really work that well with Soldier, but the fact of the matter is that the half-zat is a demo man weapon, not a Soldier weapon. I honestly have no idea why they decided to give this to Soldier because it does not work with rocket jumping well at all. I still don't think I'll do this, but if I decide to give the half-zat to Ichi any changes, I'll do it in the Demo Man video, since Demo Knight is what a lot of the balancing would have to be based on instead of Soldier. So anyway, those are my suggestion ideas for Soldier. Since Soldier has the most usable weapons out of any class, I was actually impressed that most of them were pretty good. Even most of the weapons that need changes are still halfway decent choices, and the only one that I really needed to rework was the Righteous Bison. But as always, I am a human with a biased perspective, so if you disagree with any of my changes, let me know why, and I'll be sure to respond. And if I don't address your comment in the comment section, I am eventually going to be doing a video where I address specific feedback and kind of change some stuff around that I think I got wrong originally. So if I get something completely wrong, let me know and I'll be sure to add it. Anyway, that is going to do it. If you like this video, make sure to let me know by pressing the thumbs up. I'm probably going to try to finish the rest of the classes now that I know people like this type of series. And yeah, hopefully we'll see more in the future. Have a good one.